Hi, Between the Chapters Book Club. Admin LJ here with yet another one of our really exciting live panels. You guys know by now, I really love getting to set these up and spend an hour with you guys as well as our special guests. This evening, we have another group of some of my favorites. They are some of the best-selling historical mystery authors. Everyone here in the club knows that I'm a big history nerd, so always excited to get to host these types of panels and these types of conversations. And I hope you guys have prepared some really fun questions. This is a really fun group of authors that I think you're going to enjoy this hour with us. For anyone who's new to our live chats, make sure you drop your questions and comments down in the comment section below. I'll be moderating and hanging out with you guys down in the comment section, and we'll ask the authors a couple of your questions throughout the hour, let you guys have a conversation with them, as well as my own questions. And as an extra incentive to get those conversations going, as long as you drop a question in the comment section before 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, you will be entered automatically to win a flash giveaway. We are giving away a bundle of each of the author's newest releases. So if you're wanting a couple of new historical mysteries, make sure you give us a question down in the comment section below, and maybe you'll be the lucky winner tonight. So without further ado, I'm so excited to bring onto the conversation Alyssa Maxwell, who is the author of Murder at Wakehurst, which is the 9th book in her Gilded Newport mystery series. We're also going to be joined by Andrea Penrose, author of Murder at the Royal Botanic Gardens. That comes out tomorrow, so you're getting an early conversation about that release. That is the 5th book in the Rexford and Sloan mystery series. And then we're also being joined by Annalee Huber, author of Murder Most Fair, which is the 5th book in her Verity Kent mystery series. So excited to talk about all 3 of these series. They're really interesting books with such different perspectives on these particular timelines and periods, and I think it's going to be a really fun conversation. So I hope you'll all join me down in the comment section below, and welcome our guests. All right. Hi, ladies. Thank you so much for joining our book club this evening. We're all really excited to have you with us tonight.
Thank you. We love being here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Love to interact with readers.
We've not had you guys as our special guests before in the book club, so I know that they're all really excited to get to have a conversation with you just as much as I am. And just as a little sneak peek, readers, I had the chance to talk with them for a little bit before we went live, and they are a fun group of people to talk to. So definitely get your questions in for us. But first things first, for any readers who don't know about you or your newest series, your newest releases, can you just give everyone a little bit of information about your books, your series, who you are? And I'm just going to follow the order that's on my screen right now. So I'm going to let Andrea start us off and just tell us a little bit about her series and her new release tomorrow.
Well, thank you very much. Hi, I'm Andrea Penrose, and my series is set in Regency, England, which is Jane Austen's era. As a tagline for my series, I like to say, lordly logic meets feminine intuition. Things are about to get really interesting. I've had a lot of fun creating 2 seemingly mismatched sleuths who actually are a perfect team because they're both very careful observers, but they see things in very different ways. My heroine, Charlotte Sloan, is a strong, independent, intelligent woman artist who isn't afraid to defy the conventions of her society, but she does so very carefully and cleverly. She is a satirical artist, London's most popular social commentator, but she does it under a pen name. Lord Rexford, my hero, is a sardonic aristocrat who's also a brilliant scientist. In the first book of the series, circumstances force them to work together to solve a heinous murder, one in which Lord Rexford is the prime suspect. Needless to say, they butt heads at first. But they come to have a grudging respect for each other, and as the stories develop, a real friendship. Now, I write really character-driven mysteries, and the plots take readers from the highest to the lowest circles of London society. And one of the things I found really interesting and fun to explore are the themes of friendship, loyalty, trust, and what truly makes a family.
I love that, and definitely have some questions for you later in the broadcast. Anna Lee, why don't you go next?
Sure. Thank you for having us. I write the Verity Kent mysteries, and Verity, they're set in post World War I, mostly England, but she kind of goes into Europe and some other places. And she was a spy for the British intelligence during the war. And in this fifth book in the series, we are seeing her great aunt, who is from Germany. She shows up at her doorstep, and this causes a lot of trouble because at this time in late 1919, there's a lot of German anti-sentiment all throughout England, justifiably somewhat because of the war. And there's a lot of strained feelings. And so she decides she needs to get her great aunt out of London, and she goes home for the first time to Yorkshire to see her family since the war began. And there's a lot of strain. This book really delves into her interpersonal relationships, her families. A big theme is about grief and how we all deal with it differently. And of course, murder and mayhem, take place. It is a murder mystery. So so it's a lot of fun.
Love that. Alyssa, why don't you go next?
Sure.
Well,
I write two series. I write Ladies Made Mysteries, but my most recent book is Murder at Wakehurst, which is part of the Gilded Newport Mysteries. Now, as the series title might suggest, this takes place in Gilded Age Newport, Rhode Island. And really, Newport was kind of synonymous with the Gilded Age. This is where the country's most prominent and wealthy families gathered each summer to kind of seal bargains and make new connections with one another and marry off their adult children. So it was very not only socially important to what they called the 400, which was America's most elite families, but it was also very important in a business sense. Now, my sleuth, Emma Cross, has lived in Newport all her life. She's born and raised, but she also happens to be a distant Vanderbilt cousin and very close to the family that comes in summers up there in Newport. And she's also a journalist. So all these combine to give her the opportunity to be at all the social functions. She goes sometimes as a journalist and sometimes as a guest through her Vanderbilt connections. But the series explores each of those Gilded Age mansions that sprung up during the 1890s. It explores the families, the real life families who owned them. And as Andrea said, family dynamics are very important to me, and I love exploring that through my fiction. And Emma gives me that opportunity, and I have a lot of fun at the same time. I think of the three of us, I probably have the lighter series. They're fun. They're about parties. I mean, yes, there are some serious themes, but this is summer in Newport. It was high life. It was high society, and they were there to have a lot of fun.
there's nothing wrong with a bit of a light series.
It is.
I love that in mysteries. I love that we can have these lighter, fun looks back, especially historical mysteries. These fun looks back, but also have that intriguing plot. But on the other end of the spectrum, we can have a little bit more of an intense mystery. So I think that's what makes mystery such a fun genre to read. And I'm sure it comes in and fun for you guys to write, I'm sure, as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm always curious, how much did you guys know about the time periods that you set your books in prior to writing them? You know, is that what inspired you to write them, or did you kind of just have this idea and then, you know, fell in love with that particular time period? I'm just always curious because it's none of these are time periods that I would have automatically assumed for a mystery setting, which is really fun as a reader. Let's start with Anna Lee on this question.
Sure. So I've always really been intrigued by World War One. I think it's because, especially here in the U.S., we kind of skip over it when we're learning in school. It seems like we kind of gloss over it to get to World War II because America didn't have a huge role in World War One until later. And so I have pretty much been really interested in and researched it for a long time. I'd always thought that it would be fun to write a book series. I have another series I write and some other things. But I always wanted to do something with World War One, and I just couldn't find the right angle to approach it at. And it was when I was doing research and I stumbled across this information about declassified files from the British Secret Service, MI6, that they declassified in the late 90s and early 2000s. And there was thousands of women who served with British intelligence in the First World War. And I did not know that. I mean, I think most people, you think World War II, there was tons of female, agents, but World War One, not really. And they all kept their mouths shut. They didn't tell anybody. I mean, there was all these news articles about families talking about how their great grandmother told them, because they were finally allowed to share, oh yeah, I was a spy or I did this for British intelligence during the war, And so I just found it really interesting. And I started researching these women, and I knew that was the angle I should take. And I got to really highlight them, and I got to really delve into World War One and later the after effects like I wanted to.
And then let's have Alyssa go next.
What really drew me to my series was the setting, Newport. Anybody who knows me or has heard me talk will know that my husband is a Newport boy. His family has been there for generations, both sides. Everyone came, I think the latest to arrive in Newport was somewhere in the 1800s. So everyone has been there for a long time. And I first visited Newport right before I met him around 1979. I'm dating myself, and I fell in love with it. It truly is like time traveling back into this country's past. And so many time periods are represented there, from the early colonial era through the Gilded Age, through the 20th century. So it's fascinating. I knew that I wanted to set a mystery series in Newport, and when I thought about it, I realized that the most visible era, the most famous and the one most easily recognizable, was the Gilded Age, because of the mansions that still exist, some as museums, some are still private homes. So I thought, when somebody comes to Newport, the first thing they do is take a tour of the breakers, more often than not. And I began the series with Murder at the Breakers. In 1895, the Breakers was brand new. It had just opened. I set it at the first party they ever held there. It was Gertrude Vanderbilt's coming out party. And, with that, my series was off and running. But honestly, before I started researching, I didn't know a lot about the Gilded Age, other than that the robber barons built these amazing mansions. So I had to do a lot of research on it, but what made it, of course, easier is being able to visit and tour the mansions and talk to tour guides and delve into the historical records of the Preservation Society of Newport County and the Historical Society of Newport. So it was actually quite easy. There's no shortage of information about the Gilded Age, the families, what they did, and Newport in particular.
That's so fun. I'm sure it's nice to be able to actually visit one of the locations that helps inspire your books and really put you in the story. That's fun.
Yes, not only for me, but for readers who I hear from, and they tell me their experiences at the mansions. And that's, there's no words to express how gratifying that is. especially if they tell me, oh, I read your book and then I went, or I brought your book with me. And yeah, it's really special.
I bet it is. That sounds really fun. All right, Andrea, how about for you?
I think I fell in love with the Regency reading Jane Austen and Georgette Hare. And, I fell in love with, the country villages of Jane Austen and the ballrooms and the fancy carriages in those novels. But the more I learned about the Regency, the more it really fascinated me, because it's considered the birth of the modern world. You had suddenly all these new ideas in science and music and politics and art clashing with the conventional thinking from the past. And people were really breaking the mold. You had Turner doing impressionistic watercolors. You had Byron writing this incredible romantic poetry. You had Mary Wollstonecraft writing the first feminist manifestos. So I began to really love. You had the Industrial Revolution, and suddenly technology is changing the world. Turning it upside down. People are scared of it. You had the Luddites who didn't want. So in many ways, it's so much like our own modern world, and yet you can have these wonderful fancy ball gowns and have that fairy tale element, but you can deal with real issues and real what society was going through that have relevance, I think, to our readers. So a modern day reader, and how does a woman find her place in a society that is, the rules are changing, and how can you be there sort of finding your place within that and learning how to follow your passion. That's what really excited me about writing in the era.
I can say as a reader, those are all reasons that I love anything set in the Regency, especially as a Jane Austen reader. How can you resist a book that has the beautiful gowns and that history? So we do have lots of really great reader questions coming in. So we're going to start getting to some of those. Readers, if we do not get to your question during this live broadcast, the authors will be checking out the comments section over the next couple of days as well. So we will try to get, and I will also be going through them later on. We will try to get to all of your questions. But there's lots of great ones coming in. Keep them coming in. They're really fun. I'm enjoying reading them while we're talking. So first reader question. Have you had a character, or maybe a couple of characters in your series, that went a different way than you originally thought they would?
That's a great question.
I think we're going to start with Andrea, because I think she's got an answer.
I do. I have, and I get comments on it from a lot of people. I in the first book, I gave Rexford, his best friend, who we went to Oxford with, I meant him as a humorous foil. His name is Sheffield, and I thought he's a charming fribble. He's sort of he's very handsome and charming. He's sort of feckless and never has any money, and I really meant him. And suddenly he just wouldn't. He started to do really, when the chips were down, came through and really proved to be. And he's grown in the series. He's become more serious. He's become interested, and it's fun. He just sort of muscled his way in, and he's become sort of a star in some of the, he solves one of the very big mysteries in the fourth book, and everyone is saying, Sheffield did this. And he gets the girl that he's in love with because he's a brilliant mathematician. I shouldn't give away things, but he just sort of ran away, and I loved it. He just kept saying, "No, I'm smarter than that."
Well, you've got a couple of Sheffield fans in the comments section, so readers really love them. Anna Lee, how about you? Have you ever had a character kind of go to the wayside on you?
Oh, absolutely. They're always going amok in my brain. I plan them for a specific thing, a specific scene, and then they're like, I'm not going away. No, I have more to do. I know better than you. One in particular, and he shows up in the second book, in Treacherous is the Night, Alex Xavier. He was a spy with Verity. He was part of British intelligence. He was actually put into the German army several years before the war began, and then he's undercover in the German army in Belgium during the war, and that's how Verity, when she's undercover in German occupied Belgium, they end up working together on a couple of cases, and she actually, when his cover is blown, ends up sneaking him out of Belgium, basically saving him, and he was just this charismatic, James Bond kind of person, but he ends up having so much more depth, and he's so much more fun, and he's really just he's going to be in the series for a long time. I have plans for him. So and he was based on a real person too, that was a real spy that was in the German army in Brussels and had been there for years before the war began. He was in the German army, so he was a lot of fun to weave in, to get to use that real stuff.
Readers in our book club will know that I am a huge sucker for any character based on a real historical figure, so automatically a favorite for me. And then, Alyssa, how about you? Have you ever had a character kind of go a little funny on you?
Yeah, absolutely. I do plot in advance, but I always tell myself it's not written in stone. And pretty often characters will make decisions that maybe I hadn't made yet. And the biggest example of that in the Newport series is I began with Emma kind of having two possible love interests, because there was her lifelong friend, really, Jesse, who's a bit older than her, but he is a Newporter. He is a police detective. And socially, they're kind of on the same level. So it made sense that maybe this is who she might end up with and continue her very happy life in Newport. But then along comes Derek, who's member of the 400. His family is never going to approve of someone like Emma, even though she's a distant Vanderbilt cousin. She's from the wrong side of, not the sheets, but maybe the wrong side of the tracks. They don't have money. She works for a living. That's not going to work. And to tell you the truth, I hadn't decided which one I was going to go with for the first few books. And I discovered that among readers, there was kind of a team Jesse and a team Derek, and people had very definite ideas as to which one she should be with. And even now, I still hear that occasionally. She did make a decision a few books back, and it came as a surprise to me. It happened in a scene, and it kind of wrote itself where Emma made her decision, and that was that. And she hasn't wavered or changed her mind, and I'm at peace with it. I think she made the right decision, and it was not the easy decision. So there you go.
You've got to love a strong-willed character who likes to surprise you. That's the fun of them.
Yes.
Which, speaking of this question, I love this reader's question. I'm going to paraphrase it just a little bit because it is a little bit lengthy, but how do you balance writing? All three of you have the hallmarks of really strong and independent women in your series. How do you balance that with the historical accuracy where during these time periods, women couldn't be as independent as we might like them to be or might want to see on page? How do you strike that balance, and how do you give your women the agency to be strong within this time period? I'll let whoever wants to raise a hand and go first. I'll let you decide because it's a little bit of a heavier question. So whoever wants to go first. All right, Annalie, if you want to kick it off.
Sure. I think the key is that there were always women who were stronger and independent and did things. We could all name off historical figures. They were maybe the outliers, but they did exist. And so the key is, I think, in balancing that historical accuracy is making it clear that these heroines maybe aren't the norm. And so the way they're, the people around them, the secondary characters react to that. But all of us, all of our female figures are based on real people that did real things, and they just happen to be the outliers. And I think that's the mark of a good historical mystery that lets you get into it and understand that, it's escapism, but it's also true. So.
Mm-hmm. I totally second that. I think every era, they're always the the rules you read about. And come on, rules are always broken. And as Anna said, it's there where our characters might be a bit on the outlier, and you have to structure the plot and sort of how they're doing it to be realistic. I mean, you're not going to, have they like in any era, you figure out how to get your way. You figure out how to exist within the rules, but also know exactly how to break them, or how to uh, find your passion and yet still not get totally censured. And you do that with supportive friends. You do it with just being smart and understanding how to deal with the different groups of people that you interact.
Yeah, I
Love that.
agree. I could name several women right within the Gilded Age who broke the norms and went against the rules.
Sure.
It's important, I think, that our characters understand the consequences of when they break rules and be willing to take responsibility for those consequences. They don't run blindly into a situation where they're going against everything they've been raised to believe in. They understand that there will people who will disapprove, and there may be people who will now not allow them in their homes. But
Mhm.
as long as they keep an eye on the fact that, yes, I'm breaking a rule and, I'm going to have to deal with this, I think it helps to be believable.
I love that. I love that all three of you had such a great point that, you know, rules are meant to be broken. We always have, those adventurous spirited people throughout history who like to push boundaries just a little bit. And of course, I love to see women pushing boundaries in my fiction just as much as I love to see it in my history. So, love that we're kind of bringing that into these genres and these books where we might not see it otherwise. Um, just lost the comment section. Well, let me see if I can find it again. We had one reader asking if history was one of your favorite subjects in school.
Yes.
I
Go
have,
ahead.
I have a comment in my fourth grade little yearbook or whatever they give you, and my teacher said, Andrea is the class master of history. And I love that. My mother kept that and put it in the scrapbook. I guess, yes, from an early age, I don't know why I was fascinated by history. I think I got
Yeah,
scolded
same
a lot.
here. Oh,
Yeah.
the same here.
Oh,
I
there we
loved
go.
learning about especially families, how they lived in the past. That always fascinated me. I love stories about girls through history, Revolutionary War stories, that type of thing. I love to play history, when the other girls are playing house, I was playing castle or, frontier girl or whatever. Yeah, and I don't know why. It's always been a fascination. When my family moved up to Connecticut, um, and I think I'd mentioned this to you. I was horrified by the fact that I was moving from Long Island to Connecticut. But once I saw what was around me, the history of it, the architecture and how beautiful it all was, just it really spoke to me. And I became much more of a Connecticut girl than I ever had been a New Yorker.
Interesting. Yeah.
And then Anna Lee, how about you? Favorite subject in school?
I
All
think
right.
we're having trouble with audio.
All right, we might be having some technical difficulties right now, so we'll circle back around to it in just a minute. All right, I'm going to go ahead and move on. Let's see if her audio will start working here in just a second. Let's see. We'll pull another reader question here. How about... there was one right at the beginning of the chat. Here we go. Which book in your series was the most fun for you to write? Let's start with Alyssa on this one.
I always have to say the one that I'm currently writing. um, I'll go back and say Murder at Ochre Court was a lot of fun to write because of the electricity used in the story and the way I used it. It kind of sparks a murder. In Murder at Wakehurst, though, I bring in a kind of Renaissance fair. It's a garden party, but I modeled it after a Renaissance fair because the owner of Wakehurst, James Van Allen, was such an Anglophile and loved everything Elizabethan. So it made sense that he might actually hold that kind of garden party. But I'm such a Ren Fair nerd from way, way back that it was so much fun to bring in everything that I had seen and participated in, whether it was archery or watching the joust or watching the Shakespearean actors up on stage. So that was a lot of fun to do.
It's oh, I was.
Oh no,
Yeah,
sorry, I was going to toss it to you, Andrea.
I can't. It's so hard to pick a favorite. But one thing I loved about writing Murder at Kensington Palace was I went to London and I was in line right when the door opened. So I basically walked into Kensington Palace with no one else in the room. I shot up the main stair and I knew what scenes I wanted to write. I walked up the famous painted The King's Staircase and then was into the drawing room and I was just imagining where my characters were going to be because the first scene was going to start at a party there, a scientific soiree, which was often hosted there, and then went through the side rooms and saw the famous clock and said, oh great, I've got to have them talking around this clock. And so that was really fun. And then I walked the later that afternoon to the Royal Institution, which is this wonderful Doric columns, and it was the headquarters of the very famous scientific society. And again, the experiments with electricity in the basement, they had a lab set up by Michael Faraday, who was a very famous scientist. And I used something called the voltaic pile, which is an early battery, and they had it all set up just as with the wires and everything. So I'm sitting there taking pictures and really feeling the ambiance in the actual room that I was going to set these incredible things happening. So that was especially fun, but I've loved writing all of them.
And then Anna Lee, 2 questions because we didn't get you on the last one. Which was your favorite book in your series to write? And was history your favorite subject in school?
History. It was probably my favorite. That and music. Those are my 2 things, my 2 jams. So those are I don't know. Yeah, I just loved the most. I always loved learning just about the lives of people in the past and all of that. And I'm a music major in college, so music's a big thing for me. But as far as I think I agree with Alyssa a bit. It's kind of, I would say that the most fun book to write is the one I'm starting to write. And then once you get into the middle and everything's a mess and you can't figure it out, it's not any fun anymore. But yeah, and I will say one thing that one there's always bits and pieces that are really fun in each book, but maybe one that really sticks out is in A Pretty Deceit. There's a bit of a scavenger hunt that Verity and her helper, her co-people are sent on trying to figure it out, and it was a lot of fun because it had to do with Roman ruins, but also the war. And so weaving all this stuff together and trying to make it work and figuring out how to leave the clues for them. That was a lot of fun.
As someone who is horrible at scavenger hunts, that sounds like a nightmare to try to choreograph. But I know you could do it.
It got a little tricky too, because I was like, okay, this is what this place looked like in now, but what did it look like in 1919? And what did it look like in, 50 AD 52? And what? So,
the things we authors tangle ourselves in. Why
Exactly.
did I ever think this was a good idea?
Exactly.
Well, speaking of trying to figure out what something might have looked like or how it would appear, how did you each go about your research component? Alyssa, you talked a little bit at the start about you actually went to Newport. Andrea, you said the same thing. You were at Kensington Palace at one point. How did you immerse yourself into these rich histories to make sure they came alive for readers? I'll let Andrea kick this one off.
It's a mixture. I mean, I do try and get to England when I can. It happened in the last year and a half, unfortunately. I love traveling. But when I get there, I make a point of going, just walking through London and just sort of soaking up, seeing little landmarks buried within the modern things. And then I also go to all the small esoteric museums. Go out to the Docklands and look at the Museum of the Docklands. You learn such fascinating things that you don't expect. Or there's a museum just on the Guards, which were the elite military unit there. And, I went there, an hour after I'm sitting down with this wonderful elderly gentleman at the cash register and ask him a question about a uniform. And an hour later, we had sketched out, and he said, you can identify what unit a guard is in by the way the buttons are arranged on his tunic. And so doing things like this, it's just incredible. Or you go to the Museum of London and you walk through the rooms they have set up of the different eras, and you actually see sort of what Vauxhall Garden looked like, and saw some of the clothing they would wear or the pistols that they used in duels. Those are the things that make my stories come alive, because when I can see it and sometimes even touch it, they become real to you. And then I just read on, again, esoteric books for this current book, wonderful thing called The Brothers Gardeners, which was all about the development in England and all of Britain, of these people who became very passionate about botanical gardens and growing medicinal herbs. And they traded them back and forth. They traded them to America and got American gardeners to send them things. And they developed, they were really passionate and really changed medicine. So learning that stuff just is so exciting to me and makes the past come alive.
And then Alyssa, how about you?
I have to say that a lot of my research into Newport started before I ever knew I was going to write the series, even before I became a writer. It happened sitting around my in-laws' dining room and hearing them talk about their daily lives in Newport and the people they knew, and seeing how their lives were there, going to church with them and seeing what their church happens to be the one that my sleuth attends, so I got a firsthand look at that. I kind of absorbed so much of that through the years, especially when we were still living in New England, that it just kind of became part of my own view of Newport. And so when I write about the townspeople and the closeness and how, Emma has this friend and that friend, lifelong friends from the point, and they help each other and all of that, that's all real. That's all real experience. Um, on the more practical side, I started off at the library with a, pile of books, or I talked to my husband. He's got photos, reams and reams of photographs taken by his father and grandfather. I love archived newspapers, have been fabulous in finding like tiny details that nobody bothered to make a point of recording anywhere else. So all of those things combined really helped me shape my world that I'm writing about.
I love that you got to talk to people who are actually from the area, from the community. That's such a cool, like, personal touch to the setting.
And it was personal. There was, at that time, there was no ulterior motive of I'm doing research for this book I'm writing.
Right.
It was just life. Yeah.
And then Annalee, how about you? You know, like you said, World War I's not really a subject that we learn about very much here in the States. So how did you approach your research for it?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. Being able to be there and hands-on, that's totally invaluable. For me, it's been tricky the last 7 years because I have two little girls. So I have not gotten to make as many trips across the pond as I'd like. So for me, a big part of the research for the series has been reading and reading and reading and reading, just like the main, histories, just reading about the war. The biggest resource for me has been firsthand letters and memoirs and things like that, especially for my era that I write in. There's really this rhythm to the language. I mean, you're getting into the jazz era and there's so much slang. It's such great, delicious slang. I mean, they used it in the trenches. And then there's also, the society girls are getting into the bright young people. It's later in the 20s, but they're already using the slang in their letters. And so whenever I find something, I'm like writing it down. I got to use this somehow. And, the memoirs from people in the war, whether they were soldiers in the trenches, which totally tells you a lot about the war, but also their mindset, how they were coming home and the way they dealt with people. And also, there was one that's been really invaluable. Captain Henry Landau was in charge of the military section of British intelligence inside Holland, which ran all of the resistance intelligence gathering networks within the German-occupied areas of Belgium and northern France. And so his memoirs were so invaluable, had so much information about La Dame Blanche, which was their main resistance network, and just the people involved and how it worked and all these little anecdotes and learning about, these teenage girls who were, who sweet talked their way into these German soldiers, giving them a ride when they were in a place they weren't supposed to be because, talk about ballsy. Because of course these teenage girls aren't up to anything, they're cute. We'll take them, so just all these things. It just, for me, those have been the best resource, definitely.
Again, as like a self-professed history nerd and history lover, I love that all three of you brought that kind of personal element, whether it was being in a place and really seeing it, taking photographs of it, taking letters and getting the language, or taking personal stories. I love that extra layer is there. And I think it really makes all of these stories come to life for people who don't know the time periods very well. So I always love hearing that. We talked a little bit earlier this hour about characters that surprised you while you were writing. And I think for a lot of us and for a lot of the conversation, they ended up being characters that we ended up really loving as a fact of them being surprising. One reader is wondering if you could be one character from your series for a day, or just even to be like one of your characters, who would you want to be like? And I'll let Annalee start this one.
Well, it would depend on the day. Let's see. Oh my goodness. I mean, it would be fun to be Verity for a day if it was a good day. Right. I don't think I'd want to go be her during the war.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, it really comes down to the day and the timing of that. I mean, there's certain moments of a lot of characters that would be fun or places to get to see, especially historical events that maybe they were a part of, but they weren't in danger.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. Oh.
And then Alyssa, how about you? Any character you would like to be from your series?
I would love to be Emma. Emma's got a great life. She's independent enough. She's got enough money to keep her on this side of poverty. She has adventures. She's got good friends. She's got her little family unit, her nanny, who's like a surrogate grandmother to her. Her maid of all work, Katie, is really more of a friend. Her brother, Brady, who, comes a long way in the series from a kind of ne'er-do-well to a guy who's walking, a much straighter path. Yeah, absolutely. And I would much rather be her than any of the society girls, because I know what their lives were like. And yes, they had anything you can possibly imagine. money was no object. They wore those amazing Worth gowns. They rode the best horses. I mean, everything was perfect in their lives, but they did not have freedom to do really as they liked. Most of them made marriages that made them unhappy. Yeah, no, I'd rather be the girl who's living on the edge of the ocean in an old rambling house with my driving my own carriage and having a job that keeps me you know in decent clothes, if not worth gowns.
Okay, you're saying for one day, how about one evening? I'm going to be the Dowager Countess Peak, sitting at the ball, and I get to be outrageous and tap my cane and watch everybody else machinating. She's watching Charlotte and Rexford trying to elicit information. Sheffield is probably drinking too much. And she's just having a ball watching everybody and being able to yell at people and hit them with her cane. So I'm going to the ball and enjoying that.
Well, I was going to say, there's no answer but the Dowager.
And feeding the weasels ginger biscuits.
Right, of course. I always love to ask our historical themed authors and historical themed panels. We've talked a lot about the research. We've talked a lot about what you did to put the research in. What is one of your favorite historical facts or a piece of historical trivia that you love to bring out every once in a while to tell people? Whether it's about the time period that your series is set in, or if it's just a general, I just love general history. So any fun historical facts that you love to throw out? And I'll let whoever wants to raise their hand first kick us off.
Oh, I've got a great one.
All right, we'll start with you.
There were roller coasters in Regency Paris.
Definitely did not know that.
It is. I have the most wonderful pictures of. I mean, huge. It was because when the first time they beat Napoleon and sent him to Elba, all of the occupation troops, a lot of them were from the Russian army, and the Russians had a tradition. In fact, in France today, they're still called roller coasters are called Montagne Russe, Russian mountains, because they used to make them out of snow in Catherine the Great's day, and they would take sleds and slide down and have parties in the winter with tea and hot rum or hot vodka, whatever. And so the Russians came and they built these elaborate out of wood and with rails, and they had these carts they put on, and it got to be high society. Everyone went to the park and you'd go up and you'd slide down these amazing roller coasters. So that is really a fabulous thing to have. If you go to my website, readers, I've got a whole thing on them and show the actual colored engravings from the time, and they are amazing things to see. I mean, they're huge.
As a roller coaster fan, that's something I definitely didn't know. I love that. I'm going to go look that up after this conversation.
On your roof.
All right. And Alyssa, Annalee, whoever wants to throw a hand up first, I'll let you go next.
Well,
if you don't have one, that's okay. Okay, Alyssa.
Well, we all know that Mrs. Astor, Caroline Astor, was the queen of society, and she decided who was in and who was out. And if she didn't like you or you didn't measure up, that was it. You were not going to receive invitations to her parties. But yet, when it came to her own daughters, she really caved because one of them, Emily, married James Van Allen, who I mentioned before. He was the Anglophile, and a lot of people kind of looked at him askance because of the Anglophile thing, and he put on so many affectations. And she also Mrs. Astor didn't consider him good enough for her daughter, but she, in the end, allowed her daughter to marry him. Unfortunately, she didn't live for a very long time. In my book, he's a widower by then. But Mrs. Astor's other daughter, Carrie, married into the Wilson family. She married Orm Wilson, and they were not considered good society at all. The father, the Wilson's father, was a blockade runner during the Civil War, and it's even believed that Rhett Butler was modeled after him. So they were very nouveau riche and very not old society. But when Carrie said, I'm going to marry him or I'm going to starve myself to death, Mom said, all right, she sucked it up and she went along with this marriage. So she was kind of the dragon of society, but when it came to her own children, she loved them enough not to lose them, as some families did when they disapproved of their children's marriages.
That's really interesting. I never would have thought of that. Never would have guessed at that. And then, Annalee, do you have any fun history facts you want to throw out for us?
I feel like I'm always horrible about this question because I always think of like things that are just not fun. I seem to have really weird macabre luck when I stumble across crazy facts that are historical, and I'm like I'm like, no, I'm not gonna share that. No, especially researching the war and reading these memoirs and stuff. I mean, stuff that makes you gasp, but you're like, yeah, I'm not gonna share that.
That's true. If you don't want to share one, you don't have to.
Yeah, I'm gonna skip.
Okay,
I can't think of anything fun, and I don't want to drag the conversation down.
All right. So, next question. One reader is wondering. This is a new reader to all three of you. Can the books in your series be read as standalones, or do they need to read the full series to get the full effect? Let's start with you, Annalee.
Yeah, you can absolutely read each of these books as standalones. You can jump in and you won't be confused. Although you will miss the character development. I always say my books are really about the characters. It's their character arc throughout the series. And then the mystery just happens to be the plot, and the history is the setting that's wrapped around it. So if you really like to read about characters and their struggles and their triumphs and the arcs they take, then you definitely want to start at the beginning to see their journey. Not just Verity's, but a lot of the minor characters too. But if you jump in at the newest, you will not be lost. You'll be fine. You'll be able to catch up.
And then Alyssa, how about you?
Same answer, honestly. Yeah, you ideally start from the beginning, but if you pick up one of the later ones, you can read it, know what's going on, and then go back and start and read them in order.
Exactly the same. Yes, I think we all try and make sure a reader can pick up and enjoy the current book, no matter if they've read the others. But character, arc is important, and the journey they go on is really what we, I think, love to build, and I think you just appreciate the characters more when you start with them on that journey.
Excellent. I was desperately scrolling through the comment section to see if I could find this question to put it on the screen, but there's been so many comments, which is great, that I can't find it now. So one reader had asked, other than the authors that are on this chat, who is an author that you recommend or an author that you have on your keeper shelf that you like to tell people to read? And I'll let Andrea start first.
A very good friend and wonderful writer is Lauren Willig, who writes a number of different time periods. She wrote a wonderful Regency set tongue-in-cheek spy series. It's sort of a parody on the Scarlet Pimpernel, which is just delightful. But her latest one is actually set in World War I. It's about the Smith College relief unit that went over. And it's a wonderful story of a sisterhood, these college girls who have no idea, to go over and give humanitarian aid. And they adopt a village and try and help them recover from the devastation of war. And it's a beautiful poetic, but she writes in a number of eras that type of book, all about sort of women and friendships and finding yourself. I highly recommend Lauren's books.
Great. And then Alyssa, how about you? Any author that's on your keeper shelf to recommend?
Oh my gosh. There were so many, and most of them are friends that I don't want to offend anybody. But since I write about society, Ashley Weaver's Amory Ames series, which
Yeah.
brings you into high society in London in the
Yeah.
1930s, is fantastic. It's beautifully
Yeah.
written.
Yeah.
You will feel like you're in the 1930s. You get a feel of the beautiful gowns that they wore. There's a wonderful, romantic thread going through. Amory is married, but it's kind of it's a conflicted marriage, and you watch the evolution of that. And yeah, I love that series, so I would highly recommend it.
Excellent. Annalee, how about you?
So Mary Stewart is my absolute favorite author. She writes her romantic suspense books. I adore. But I would say for a more modern writing author, I had just read the first two books in Karen Hawkins' Dove Pond series, and I just loved them. They're not actually mysteries. They're contemporary magical realism, Southern Town. I mean, I love them. I love like Sarah Addison Allen. I love that whole genre, Heather Weber and all that. But her latest series in that is really good. So I highly recommend. The first book is called The Book Charmer, which if you're a reader, I mean, how can you resist that, right? So it's a lot of fun. And the books talk to the main character in that book. So tell her she's a librarian and tell her, you need to take me to so-and-so. And all these people are like, why are you bringing me a book on fertilizer? It's like, or whatever. And there's a reason. So it's great.
It's fun.
Okay, definitely putting that on my list immediately. That sounds really interesting. All right. I always love to end our panel discussions with this next question. It can sometimes be a difficult question for authors to answer. So no worries if you don't have an answer, if you need to take a minute for it. But we have a lot of people in our book club who are interested in the writing process and interested in being writers themselves at different levels and different positions of their careers. And I love to ask our authors who visit us, what is one piece of advice that you would have given your younger writing self if you could? If you could talk to yourself back when you first started, what would you tell yourself now, knowing what you know? I'll let Annalee start this one.
Sure. Yeah. I think I would tell myself not to sweat it so much, not to be so anxious and worried and in a hurry for everything to happen, to just enjoy it more and to just keep going. I mean, the only way you're going to become a better writer, the only way you're going to be published, is to just keep going, keep writing and writing and writing and reading and reading and reading. And so, yeah, I think that would be the big thing for me, to not panic, to not be anxious, and to just keep going, just keep at it. You'll get better and better and better, and you'll love it more and more. And yeah, so.
I think that's great advice for everyone at every stage of life. And then Alyssa, how about you? What advice would you give yourself if you could?
Yeah, I would tell myself it's not supposed to be easy. So if it feels too hard, don't think you're not a writer. Even writers who've written, 15, 20, 30, however many books,
Yeah.
it's still hard. It's not an easy process. So don't be discouraged, and don't think that because it just doesn't flow off your fingertips onto the page that you don't have the talent to do it. You do. It's just something, it's hard work. It's sitting down every day and typing whatever words, you come up with. You can fix them later. But yes, it's a difficult process, but it's also a satisfying and often a joyous one. So stick with it.
Yeah.
Excellent advice. And Andrea, how about you?
I think I tell myself, you've got to understand probably the most important quality you can have is resilience. The writing will come, but you have to be strong and you have to be patient because if you choose to be a writer, you are going to have a lot of downs as well as ups. It's a hard profession. You're going to get rejected sometimes, and you've got to just believe in yourself and be resilient, and just keep at it.
I love that. And I think that's the perfect ending note for our book club discussion. I want to say a huge thank you on behalf of all of our readers, and to our readers, I want to say a huge thank you for joining us. Your questions and comments were great for the entire chat. And our authors will be checking out the comments section over the next couple of days. You know, there were some questions that were specific to certain authors that we didn't get a chance to ask. So definitely check out the comment section. Maybe your questions will get asked at a later time. And be sure to check out the comment section tomorrow morning, where we will be announcing our flash giveaway winner for this chat. And yeah, again, ladies, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I had a great time chatting with you all, and I think our readers really enjoyed this discussion as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Everyone who tuned in. Really.
Yes. So everyone have a great evening, a good night, and we will see you later on this week for another live Q&A with one of our authors. So stay tuned for that announcement. All right. Good night, everyone.
Night.
Bye.
Good night.
Thank you.